Okay, so let's take a more in-depth look at the actual oscillator section. So the first thing we're going to look at is Oscillator A. So we're going to work top to bottom. The top is the pitch control. The first thing we have is the octave control. Next we have semitone. So let me bring this up so you can hear it. And that works in discrete increments of semitone. And then you have your fine control, which is just adjusting less than one note. And then you have your coarse control. And as far as modulation, you'll tweak these guys, but this coarse control is where you're going to do most of your modulating. So if you throw an LFO on there, hey, look, it's RJD2. If you right-click, you can remove all modulators. It's very helpful. I'll probably explain that again in the LFO section. Then moving along, we have the wavetable position. Let me pull up a morphable wavetable. If you put an LFO on here, or you can just by turning it, you saw me doing that in the last lesson. If you put an LFO on it, you can scroll through. Next, we have the morph modes. So there's a whole bunch of these. It would take me hours to explain them all. Let me go through the greatest hits. You got bend, which basically bends the middle of the note back and forth. And they all kind of do what they say. So this one bends it. Mirror creates a mirror of it. Oh, and pulse width modulation, that's basically what you get from an old school analog synth, but with old school analog synth, you can only really do a pulse or square wave, and with this, you can do just about anything. And then you have FM from B, which is cool. That's a really simple 2-oscillator form of FM synthesis. And so if I turn that on, and then I turn on oscillator B and turn the level down, you can hear it. You can do a very basic form of FM synthesis. And you can link oscillator A to the sub, oscillator B to oscillator A, and do some basic 3-oscillator FM synthesis. I will do a whole demonstration of that later in the lesson. Next, we have basic stuff like pan, left and right, and level, which you just saw me use. Next, we have the Unison and detune. All Unison does is it takes your single oscillator and creates copies of it and then detunes them. So if I just crank this up to like, say, 6 or 7, now I've got them detuned. This is the detune width. So if I do this with, say, a sawtooth wave, and you put, say, a level on here, instant bass music, swarm of bees. If you go into here, in the global menu, there's also some extra Unison features. So it defaults to bend to the range being about 2 semitones. You can crank that way up. You can start doing weird harmonic, kind of like almost arpeggio things. The width controls the stereo width. So by default, it's like 100%. Like all your detunes go like fully left and right, which can be a bit much if you're not doing a pad. If you're doing like a lead or a bass sound, that can be a bit much. So you can just dial it back. You can do totally mono. I like it usually somewhere in like the 60%. Then there's also warping. So if you scroll over that, you can see it adjusts the offset. So if you have like a bunch of modulation going on with the wavetable position and the warp modes, it'll change the wavetable position and the warp modes for the detune versions. You've also got stack, which is kind of handy. So it'll stack it in different interesting ways. So it'll do like octave up and octave down. I'll bring this all the way up. And this one does 7 semitones up, which is a fifth. So it's really handy if you want to do, say, chords. You can just add a fifth right into here without using the second oscillator. So pretty fun for making super saws and pads. And last but not least, there's a couple of different modes. So it defaults to linear, but there's also like super mode, which is sort of like the JP8000. And exponential, invert, and random. I would pause this and start messing around with things and kind of get a lay of the land, and then hit pause. We'll keep going. So now let's take a look at the phase section. So there's phase control, which is the point at which the synth starts the waveform. So, and then you have phase on random. So this creates, this is defaults to all the way up at 100%. And as you hit the key, it'll start the waveform in different places. Now for complicated patches and for complicated wavetables and for like things that are heavily detuned, it makes sense. That makes the sound more rich because you'll get phase, kind of intermittent phase consistencies. It can be a problem when you're doing simple bass patches. Let me actually backtrack and show you what phase is. So if you have, for instance, two sine waves that are perfectly in phase and they play at the same time, you get one sine wave that's double the volume. So it's just math. So if I turn that on, I'll turn off random, and we'll set the phase so it has the same phase start time and hit a key. You can hear that. There you go. Things are as they should be. Two of the same sound equals one sound that is twice the amplitude. Now, if you have two sounds that are completely out of phase, they cancel each other out and you get complete silence. So let me show you what that sounds like. I'm going to shift the phase on one of these. And as we go to completely out of phase, it turns into silence. And this is also actually how a phaser works. If we put an LFO on this, they phase in and out, and it creates that swirling effect. So normally that is really cool. But in certain instances, for instance, if I take a square wave and I make a really basic bass noise out of it, take envelope 2. Don't worry, we will explain envelopes and all these things in much more detail later. And then I decide I want to beef that up with the sub. If I have this set to random, the waveform of this is starting in just random places, but this is always going to be straight and in phase. So your bass sound will go in and out of phase, and you're going to find that you're just losing low end. And this happened to me in a couple of songs a couple of years ago before I even noticed that this was a feature, and it drove me nuts. So just know when you're doing really simple bass sounds, or if like you find the low end on your bass just fading in and out, it's probably because you forgot to turn the random phase switch off. Okay, so that was a basic overview of Oscillator A. Oscillator B is completely identical. Next, we're going to take a look at the sub-oscillator and the noise oscillator.